My name is Jimmy. Today, really want to just really share my journey in open source and .NET. I've been doing open source for a pretty long time, not as much as some people here, but more than a few, so kind of in the middle, I guess. And I've had a pretty decent experience, pretty good experience with OSS, so I kind of want to share where I view it and how it's helped me. So what have I done in open source? I kind of consider this my open source resume. This is actually just the NuGet package list of my account. This is what I'm responsible for putting out. So I've got things with varying numbers of downloads. AutoMapper, of course, is my most popular project with over 1 million downloads, I guess. But I've had some other ones that I've also viewed equally successful, but just don't have as many downloads, and that's perfectly fine. In fact, it actually just, it's in last place, but that's okay. It's my NyanCat project. So this one was me just doing a little experimentation with the ability to run any sort of random script from installing a NuGet package. So if you actually install this guy, NyanCat, let's see what it looks like here. So you install a package, NyanCat, it goes here, it actually launches a browser and just takes you to the NyanCat website. Very exciting stuff. So that's my least my least most popular one, but still, I had 782 people download this for some unknown reason. I think probably because I just tweeted about it, like, check out my cool package, and just trolls you pulling up a website there. Anyway, so yeah, I have a lot of different things that I'm responsible for. Not shown here is my graveyard of projects. Like below here in NuGet, there's a section down here that's like, here's all your deprecated packages. I have things like AutoMapper.Silverlight. Bad idea. I've also, we'll see those actually in a little bit. So for me, when we talk about how to be successful, the first thing you have to do is really define what success means for you. And I noticed that people that are grumpier in the .NET open source community have success like a bar set up here, where I have like a success bar set more like down here. So for me, success, first of all, it says, you know, does this project help me? I work on a lot of different projects. I work in consulting. We basically just build custom apps all the time. And so for me, it's nice if I am able to have some tool or some like set of code I use in one project. If it's not business specific, that I can take that code and use it in the next one. And so if I can do that with more than one project, for me, that's success for me, is that I can use this code on the next project and not have to make that code over and over again. I won't talk a lot on this talk about like asking permission to get that code pulled out, because I never have asked permission. I just did it and then said, hey, look at this open source project that started yesterday. We should use that thing. That seems to work well for me. The next level of success is in, does it help my teams that I work with? Is it helping them do better? So if I'm not actually specifically working on that project, can they use something that I've built to then make their life a little bit easier? So if the teams in my company can use whatever I'm doing, that's even better. And finally, which I care the least about, is if it helps anyone else. That's also a really big key for open source, is kind of care about everyone else the least, because they're not going to pay you to do anything. So, you know, if it helps them, great. If it doesn't, whatever. So I didn't actually start out with this definition of success for my projects. The first really big open source project I have, which you didn't see in the list, was a tool called Behave Sharp. This is one that was introduced back in the day when everyone was like really into BDD, was really starting to grow. And there was a project on the Ruby side called RBehave, which is now RSpec. So I saw it as like, okay, let's do that for .NET. We don't have that kind of DSL syntax that Ruby has, but we've got like all these fluent API stuff that we could do. So I made up this whole thing of like making the whole as I want to, so that, given, when, then sort of thing, all inside C#. And I put it out there and said, everyone should definitely use this thing because it's so cool. But I never actually used it myself. That was probably a red flag, that I'm trying to get people to use this thing that I never actually used, besides just writing unit tests about. And so that project was really just because I was in a really crappy company and I was bored and I needed some code to write. The company I was at, like in 9 months, 10 months, 11 months I was there, I wrote exactly like 9 lines of code, and it was to put a link on the shopping cart page to take a survey on checkout. So like completely horrible time in 9 months. So I blogged, which was good, and I also wrote pointless open source projects, which was bad. And I got called out on it. I got people coming to me like, you shouldn't be promoting these things. There are a number of, at the time there were a lot of people in Austin actually where I'm from in the open source community. They're very loud. And they were like really like calling me out in the middle of conferences like, you have no idea what you're talking about. And I was like, oh my God, I guess I don't know what I'm talking about. So that was my first big lesson, is don't build projects that are born out of necessity versus you're just bored and you want to try things out. Now that's not to say that projects built out of boredom aren't bad, but there has to be some need around something for me to actually find if it's useful. Or if it's something that is just purely out of boredom, then success may just mean is it a cool idea or not. It's not that it takes over the world. The second I had was this project in particular. I actually saw another guy that was doing something similar, and I didn't like the way he implemented stuff, so I just copied it and made it different, which is also not a very cool thing to do in the OSS land, is just to like see a project out there and just straight up copy it and then change it and say, here's a new project called something similar, but it's way better in these specific ways. What you can actually see in the source control history, I just like copied his code over. So that was kind of a jerk move to do. And we wound up combining our efforts before I eventually abandoned it because I didn't think it was a good idea. But that's one other thing that I'm glad I haven't done since then is trying to, if I see something interesting and I need it tweaked in a certain way, I'll try to collaborate with them first versus just forking and going my own path. The last one was, from this lesson was that because I never actually used this one, I didn't have any way to prove that it was actually a good idea, it was useful, or anyone else should use it. And every open source project I've done since then has been extracted actually from real world projects. So we'll go into a few examples when I go into story time later. But for me, the most successful projects I've had are ones that started out actually as just code inside real apps that I pulled out because it had nothing to do with that actual business and just made that as my open source project. But I don't always do this. I'm a bit of a slow learner here. So a couple years ago, I wanted to have a very similar feature and entity framework that existed in Hibernate. This feature is a little obscure. It's the idea that you can have a global where clause on every single query that goes out the door. This is something that has been built in Hibernate for years. So if you want to do things like security around, like you can't view specific records because you're not part of that security group, or things like soft deletes, like never show soft delete things. That's really easy in Hibernate, but it didn't exist in any framework. So I went ahead and built a project to allow you to do this. But it was just an experiment. I didn't tell people that this was an experiment, but I blogged about it and said, hey, check out this cool thing, and I totally forgot what a bad idea it was. And then someone else created a project that was like the real version of that, and I started getting issues of like, hey, is this actually a thing? Because people keep trying to use it, and it has all these bugs, and you don't actually respond into the GitHub issues. Maybe you should just like close the project and not do that anymore. So although I say I never do this, I still get called out because I have these experiments I don't label as such when I'm doing this. So I still do experimentation with projects, but I'm much more explicit now, saying this is just a project. In the README, it'll be like not used in production code, and so make it more of a collaboration tool than something like I've actually used this before. So I want to talk a little bit about my most successful project to date, which is AutoMapper, just to talk about where it came from, how I designed over the years, some of the mistakes I made, and so hopefully for those of you that are interested in doing open source, you can take those lessons from me myself. So this project actually started way back in 2008, and for those of you that don't remember all the way back then, this was the year that the Dark Knight movie came out. That's the first Batman movie, but not the crappy Batman movies with Joel Schumacher. They're like the good ones with Christian Bale and those guys, but not the new Batman movie with Superman. So it's like the middle Batmans, I guess. This was the first Iron Man movie came out. This is like there was a time when Robert Downey Jr. was untouchable in terms of being able to be an actor because he did cocaine all the time, and so this was like the one that resuscitated his career. And also Twilight, that was the thing. That was like the #1 movie that year. So yeah, that was a thing. So AutoMapper came from a lot of ideas actually from the FUBU guys that did their MVC project. Jeremy Miller wrote a post about how he likes to design MVC applications. And we were very, very early in the MVC adoption phase. So something like, before it even went beta, it was like a preview 3 mode. We saw MVC, we're about to go to a very large project, and there was like no documentation whatsoever about how you should actually build projects using this. That's something we see often from a lot of Microsoft tools. There's no opinions really baked into those frameworks. It's more just a tool set, and it's up to you to decide how best to build applications. So I looked at how Ruby on Rails built stuff. I looked at how Python's Django project built stuff. I looked at existing MVC tools inside of .NET, the Monorail project, and they basically, they somewhat agreed on everything, but the issue was that those other platforms are very dynamic-based, and Monorail had a lot of inspiration from those dynamic-based frameworks, so they're actually really hard to look at to say, how would I do this in the world of strongly typed stuff? I did see that Jeremy did a fork in a way. He didn't like MVC framework at all, and so he went and built his own framework, whereas I decided to stick with and just try to make the best of the situation. So this project that the AutoMapper project was coming from, it was for, it's kind of a boring name, juvenile case management for the state of Texas, but the basic idea is that if you get arrested as a kid in Texas, you get processed through the system that I helped build from the beginning. And the idea is to really help kids go down the path of good and not the path of the dark side. So making sure it's really built around trying to get them help as opposed to staying in jail. Although they didn't call it jail in this application, it was called detention. A lot of the words were like sort of PC bro kind of things going on there to make it more safe. Just a different view of things. This application was replacing several applications inside the state of Texas. Every single county had their own individual system. We're trying to pull them all together to build something. And it's also trying to serve all the different agencies that deal with a kid in trouble throughout their time. So the law enforcement agencies, the prosecution agencies, the probation agencies, I think in all there are a dozen different legal entities in Texas that were dealing with this system. And a lot of different groups inside those agencies. And finally, when we finally get to the final, at least this is about a year ago, I took a snapshot of how big this app was. There's about a little over 350 controllers and over 1,000 actions. It's a very, very large app. Does anyone have anyone bigger than this? You shouldn't, because this is like way too big. This is a bad idea. Please don't ever, that was the side lesson number 1, don't ever create projects this big. This is way too big. In fact, it was so big, in the very early phases we were doing the whole user role mapping junk of there's Debbie the defense attorney, that sort of thing. And there were too many of them, so we started color coding them. And that's what we realized later on that those color codings were actually the areas of the boundaries we should have made of different smaller systems. I don't know if it's microservices or junk, but we should not have built one gigantic system. Anyway, that actually wouldn't have taken away that we still would have had to create that many controllers and that many actions. So as part of this, knowing that I wanted to create applications in a very specific way, ones that had a very opinionated view about how to build MVC applications, and that was this idea that every view should have a very specific model defined for that page. The concept of a view model. And looking at this, I knew that we were going to have to build all these pages, and I knew that it was going to be a ton. I didn't know it was going to be 1,000 actions, but I knew there's going to be a ton of different places where we'd have to be creating these view model objects. And the whole idea was that I take my rich domain model that's got all this behavior junk, and I'll map that data into a view model object that is just a pure DTO that can go across the wire. So these view model objects are very DTO oriented. They're just data, nothing else. And another side note, it's kind of funny. A few years ago, do you remember the security hole they found in Rails that was you could post up any request data and it could potentially overwrite information. The reason why is that both Rails, Django, and Monorail, the model you exposed to the outside world was your persistent model that you stored in the database. So we just take any request variables, which is just dictionary of strings, and just fold that straight into your domain model, and that's what gets saved in the database. So that's great, but then someone can actually guess what are some of the other properties you're actually exposing on the screen. Things like, just data like your first name, last name, is premium member, something like is administrator. Like that's, maybe you don't show that on a screen, but it still exists. And if you just knew that, if you just guessed a few different things, you can put that request variable in and just get saved automatically for you. So when this came out, I think Rob Connery tweeted like, oh my God, I can't believe this is in there. And I tweeted back like, this would never happen in my system because I'm using these view model objects as a thing that goes back and forth. And I build them specifically for each screen so that only the very explicit data that I'm exposing there is the things I have back and forth. Instead, I think Rails and all the other MVC as well did the whole whitelisting thing. In fact, the fix for Rails was originally open as a pull request to say, hey, you have this security issue. You should allow people to whitelist fields so that you don't have this critical security issue. I guess they weren't, the team wasn't responsive enough, so the person that opened the pull request knew that GitHub was built on Rails, exploited the hole to make himself an administrator of the project, and then merged his own pull request. The actual team wasn't very happy with that. I was like, kind of like, that's very cute, but no, please don't do that. But that was the path they went. But it was a very weird, broken path. And the path we went was to the idea of create these view models behind everything. Of course, that would be really hard with projects this big to manually map things back and forth, and that's exactly where AutoMapper was born from. It was really just like, we were like maybe 10 controllers in, we were starting to create our first edit pages, and we had this like moment of like, oh crap, this is gonna be absolutely hell if we had to do all this over time. And so I took a couple weeks in mid-2008 during the project to like build something that would just like map one thing to another and do things like flattening. So I was able to like remove the dots from all navigations and just make it one specific property so that my DTOs could be a lot more flattened, denormalized, and not have a complex object in the background. It's just a very flat looking thing. So I was able to get that in a couple weeks, but it was another 6 months or so of refinement before I actually pulled it out of the project. And the initial public commit, which is it's like the IPO, it's the IPC, was January 2009, was the very first one, and then announced it the same month with a introducing AutoMapper. With this though, I also put a few stakes in the ground to say, not this just is some tool to map things back and forth, but here's the reason why I built it. And so I had a series of blog posts that said, here's why you should care about this pattern, and also this tool helps make this easier. But the real big thing is you have to sort of subscribe to this idea of this one view model, DTO-based sort of architecture. I blogged this back in 2009, and this is still one of my biggest set of blog posts that I get hits on. Last year was the number, through 2014, I guess, it was my number 2 most trafficked blog post. That's only 1% of my overall traffic, but it's still the number 2 one. The number 1 I have is some dumb post about IKEA stand-up desks that I never want to again, and then some other stupid ones like why I'm done with Scrum. So there's a bunch of other ones like I don't care about, but this is the one that I'm most proud of because that's the one that that really cemented my idea of how you should build MVC applications. So looking at my projects, if I'm looking at what it means for these projects to be successful, I'm thinking of does it help me, does it help my teams, and does it help my community? For me, all of my projects more or less fit that bill. So although a project like in-service-bus.message routing only had 1,000 downloads, it still helped the same number of teams in my company. Maybe other people aren't using it, but that's okay. For me, this is just something I can use for the next project and the next project. And that's a little bit more of a niche tool anyway, so I know it's never going to be a big thing. I have other ones too that I've helped take over to help make them better. So something like HTML tags is not my project, but it was actually Jeremy Miller's project. And we took it over because we started using it a lot and really liked the things that were inside of there. So I became the owner of that project because I thought it was something that was really good for projects and needed an owner. Same with all the other ones. Well, except for this guy. The Entity Framework Filters ones, that's the one that I should delist. That's one I need to take off the list there. but all the other ones are ones that I use every day on my projects. Maybe not on every single project, but every time those problems come up, I'll be using those projects in those libraries. Now, one thing you won't see in this list are frameworks, because I have no idea how to make a framework successful. I know how to make a library successful, but a framework is completely mysterious to me, how to make that a successful thing in the .NET ecosystem. I don't know of any successful ones, really, because a lot of them seem to have been taken over by other stuff. But if you're looking to make libraries, like, it's really not that big of a deal. Especially if you're looking at just solving your own problems first, then that seems to be the most easy path to success. A lot of the ones I have here are taken over years of refined use. So this is another project we have called Mediator that actually started from the same project I mentioned before. So that project started as ideas in a client project starting in about 2009. We used the ideas and concepts in several projects since then, but I never really thought it should be its own project until someone finally came to me and said, hey, it's kind of annoying to copy code from project to project. Maybe you should make this an open source project. This was internally on our teams. So then I said, okay, let's go ahead and make it a project. I extracted the code out of one of our projects. We had 3 others that were doing a similar sort of pattern. They had copy and paste in code. And so I backported those other ones, deleted the code out, and made all those other projects use the same one. And that was my measuring stick to say, is this actually something that could be successful? So that for me was already a success. If I can just have our 3 or 4 concurrent teams using this one, then that's good. That's just one less thing I have to copy from project to project. Respawn's another one. Respawn is one that's basically a single file. It's just one single class. What that one does is we do a lot of integration testing. So integration testing that hits the database, and the way we manage that, as opposed to doing something like rolling back transactions before each test, we actually just clear out the database every single time. But we do it intelligently. So what Respawn does is it uses the metadata inside SQL Server to build out the graph of the tables that you have with foreign keys, and then builds a correct order in which you need to execute the delete statements to honor those same foreign key constraints. So, by the way, there was like 2 weeks of intensive investigations to what are the best possible ways to clear our databases. Should I just delete the database and then regenerate the schema? Well, that's slow. What if I disable, disable all the foreign keys and then truncate the tables and then re-enable the foreign keys? Well, that was actually 3 times slower because it's 3 times the number of statements. So for a while, we actually maintained a list of the tables to delete in like in a manual order. We have to insert it before this or that. And so Respawn took care of all that for us, and something we use on every project going forward as a way to easily get to a known state in our database. Now, because we're using SQL Server and not like something like RavenDB, we can't just easily create an in-memory database. SQL 2014 had this like new in-memory tables. Like, oh, wait, maybe we could use that, but that's like caching stuff, not the stuff for our stuff. But the nice thing was that because it was now a NuGet package, it was really easy for us to be able to just use it in every single project going forward. So that was my other lesson was the only proof of our ideas are the ideas actually put in practice. It's only when we actually use those in a real project setting that was a final indicator that yes, indeed, this is a good idea that we should continue on. Things like experiments, often stayed as experiments inside of those, and so I just kind of left those alone if they were just, they looked like they were just pure experimentation and couldn't be something that would go on to the next one. In fact, it's very similar to that old refactoring quote. It's something like, if you copy something once, that's okay, but if you copy and paste it twice, that's when you need to actually pull it out because you've duplicated that pattern twice. And so that was basically our pattern as well, is when I see us copying a concept the second time into another project, that's really the key that says, okay, maybe there's something common here we can pull out. That isn't always the case, but it's at least an indicator that maybe I should go ahead and look at making this a project. I'm pretty lucky though. My company doesn't really care if the projects are under my name versus anyone else. They're like, go ahead and put it under your name. It was very early on in AutoMapper where open source wasn't really a huge thing in .NET at the time. There's like in-unit and containers and stuff, but that was about it. And so we actually had conversations of like, should we productize this? Should we make this IP? And all of those seemed like more work than just putting code on a server somewhere. So really just I was lazy, and that was the easiest decision. But that is changing. AutoMapper is moving to microtransactions. Every single map is going to be like 0.01 cents, just letting you know. But I will run specials and stuff on holidays, you know. You can buy 10,000 maps for $1, that sort of thing. So that's all fun, like talking about success. Let's talk about the many ways in which I've screwed things up. And there were there were a lot of failures in AutoMapper throughout the years. And this is natural. I mean, if you have any code base that lives for more than a year, you're going to have a lot of things you regret in that. In fact, if you don't, that means you're probably doing something wrong or you're awesome, you know. Okay, the first thing, which was my big, huge mistake, was I used a lot of existing open source tools, and I used those open source tools as inspiration for the API. So as opposed to like trying to think about what a good API was, I just copied existing APIs. And a lot of the open source tools out there at the time were doing a lot of static stuff. Like
statute of limitations is up on this.
I know. I'm not there yet. Okay. Okay. So yeah, remember this is 2008, and so I looked at this as like, hey, you know, this the API I like the most is using static. Why? I'll just do that. So pretty much, if you look at AutoMapper's API, it's like a direct copy of Structure Maps API circa 2008. So like, yeah, it's like exactly the same. Which is funny though, because at the time, my boss was like, hey, I really liked where you're going with this, Jimmy. Maybe you should not make that static. And I was like, whatever. If this guy can do static, then I can do it too. And I know Jeremy knows who I'm talking about, so there's also some things going on there too, which maybe discount that opinion in the first place. But it turns out if I actually talked to Jeremy about that decision to make things static at the time, he could have told me that he regretted that decision and he's moving towards something better, which was instance-based. So that was my next lesson. If I was going to copy API ideas, like maybe talk to the original person about whether that copying is a good idea or not. What do you regret about that design decision? So in later projects, I did that. We had some projects where like, should I, the Mediator project supported async. So I wanted to talk to some people that did async to say, so how, you know, what does your API look like? Do you support both sync and async? If so, do you have any sort of commonalities you build between that? Now that if I see that you have both sync and async, do you regret that decision, having both APIs? Do you just wish you did async or just sync? What did you like there? What did you not like? So I would say if you're going to do something that's a variation on a theme of someone else already out there, see what they like about how they've done things, and maybe you can take lessons from them. So it's not the whipping boy anymore because I never actually talked to you whether it's a good idea or not. There were also features I reluctantly added into the framework. Very early on, I didn't really know exactly what it should be, but I had some good ideas about what it shouldn't be. And one of the things that snuck in was the idea that I can use AutoMapper to format data as it goes out the wire. But it turns out that was not a very wise decision. There are better ways to do that. Like if your DTO is going to be using JSON.NET, then like use JSON.NET as the thing that serializes and deserializes that information. Or if you're using something like Razor view engines, like use Razor as a thing that does the formatting. But this one didn't have all the features that all those other things did. But at the time, it was like under the gun. Well, we really need this, so go ahead and put something in. And I immediately regretted this decision because it was something that I put in and caused like all sorts of internal modeling performance problems. Just did not like it. So in fact, like even the documentation under this feature, I was like, don't use it. Please don't use this. It was a mistake to put these in, and at the time I thought it was a mistake I didn't think I could undo. But I was wrong, because one day I did actually finally eliminate those formatters from the feature I hated from the project. And I was very sneaky about it. I just had a commit that was just like, removing obsolete members, and then just deleted it, like, get out, without really telling anyone. Well, I did tell people, but they learned very quickly about it. So that was my next lesson is don't add features that you don't want to add. Like it seems simple, But as someone new to open source, you want to build a community. And if someone's coming in, they're interested, and they're like, hey, I really like what you're doing, but it'd be so cool if it did this. And you want to include them. So you take their pull request. But the thing is, those pull requests you have to support forever because it's your project, not theirs. You can't have things when it comes in that you say, oh, I didn't work on that. Can you go ask this person over here? And they don't respond because they're like, I don't care. It's your project now. So it seems like a very small thing to say don't add features that you don't want to add. Because I'll have other cases too where there are features as well features I just never ever used. There's a feature inside AutoMapper that lets you map from a data reader to a DTO object. To this day, I have no idea why you would do this or what it even does exactly. Mainly because the code around it is this. Reflection emit, which is like insanely obtuse about what it's doing. I'm sure someone can just like read that and understand what it's doing, but that person is not me. And so when someone has a bug around this, I'm just like, I don't know, no idea what to do with this. So that was my next lesson is, it may even be a cool idea, but if you don't personally use it, then one, it's going to be much harder for you to know whether you broke someone's existing use of it through something random. And two, you never know, it's going to be very difficult to actually support those sort of things in the future. So what I wound up doing was just ripping it all out, and I put it in a new GitHub repository, and anytime anyone opens a GitHub issue, I give them commit rights. And it's like, there you go, you can do whatever you want. So technically it's under my name, but it's really now everybody's projects going forward. I say I've done that, but I actually haven't done that yet, and people keep complaining that I haven't restored that functionality after I ripped it out. So that was actually on my to-do list for this week, is to finally get around to putting it back in there. So who here was in the strong naming talk by Daniel? I wish I had that talk given to me when I was going through a very bad phase in AutoMapper in which I removed strong naming. So the discussion of like whether or not you should strong name is all well and good, but it's one of those things that it's a feature that should be born out of like a specific need, and there was literally 0 people complaining about AutoMapper being strong named. But at the time, I read that same thread. I was impressed by all the GIFs, animated GIFs in there, so I thought, you know what? I'll jump on this train and remove strong naming. I'm going to join this team because I respected all those guys. I respected all of their opinions, and they had very good things to say. None of the things they said mattered at all to the people that actually use my project, and so I removed it, and then finally, immediately people were requesting me to put strong naming back in. So while I had literally 0 people complaining about it not being, or it being strong named, lots of people complained that it was. And in fact, one of the things that Daniel brought up that you can't binding redirect a non-strong name thing to a strong name thing hurt, because there are products like Umbraco or Sitecore or something like that that used this unfortunate version of AutoMapper that was not strong named. And when they wanted to when their clients wanted to upgrade, they couldn't upgrade because you can't just upgrade 3 to 301 because 301 was strong named. So it's literally impossible to direct people over to that new assembly. So, what?
Yeah, just drop strong naming from this number today.
That's great. So one thing that is different is if you're a project that a lot of projects depend on, then that's a much different decision than one in which it's really nothing much depends on you. But for something like a product, that was a huge deal. He could talk about what problems he's had, but I literally had none. So it was something that was just done not for any good reason whatsoever on my part. So the first thing I tried was creating separate NuGet packages for strong named assemblies to be like, okay, I can do this. It's actually pretty easy for me to go to like do an assembly signing thing. It's like a command line utility to go ahead and do that. So it's like, yeah, I'll just create a new package. So there's an AutoMapper. There's my graveyard of bad ideas. Creating separate bad naming of projects. Creating extensions for frameworks that literally nobody uses. And then this is before NuGet packages let you combine different frameworks into one package, was this one. And then down here is the AutoMapper.strongname one, which I didn't have out for very long, but there's still like 1,700 people that depended on this. So the 1,720 unfortunate souls that will never get an upgrade to AutoMapper because I'm never updating this package ever again. So, strong naming or not, that wasn't a really big deal. The big deal was if I break stuff, if I do break stuff, well, okay, no, don't break stuff. And if you do, ask first or at least tell somebody. I just did it. I didn't tell anybody about it and just put it out there. And people were like, this is not in the release notes anywhere. What's going on? So very kind of a jerk move on my part, but I learned from it. So getting past all the things you shouldn't do, the last 5 minutes I want to look at how to make your OSS life easier. And this is something like in the past 18 months, OSS, because really, so many people are creating new projects in the .NET space, it's become a lot easier to run projects. So OSS, and also getting asked if the project is dead. This is also something that happens to me all the time. I have a lot of support channels for AutoMapper. I have a mailing list that I respond to occasionally. I have Stack Overflow. I subscribe to the Stack Overflow tags to be able to get questions there. In fact, like almost all of my rep is from answering questions about AutoMapper. It can be a little bit depressing because a project as popular as that has a lot of people using it the wrong way, in my opinion. But it's a way for me to guide them down the right path if I need to. And a lot of other people help as well. Like most of the time, by the time I get to reading the question, it's already been answered and already been accepted. And someone else is getting those fake internet points besides me. But that's totally cool. It's whatever. I get questions on like really old blog posts. Like this one, is it still possible to intercept AutoMapper mapping? Like, and a blog post that was like 7 years old, he's asking this question. Like, of all the channels you could ask a question, a blog post comment is probably the very worst one besides like a fax machine. But I still respond to those comments, and I'll say, hey, can you post this question on the mailing list? Or today I'd actually just say open up a GitHub issue. That's not to say that I always answer those, because a lot of times I'll get questions that have nothing to do with my project, and I'm thinking like, there's something called AutoMapper out there that is definitely not my thing. Sorry, like Wave Mapper, record audio coming through my speakers. I'm sorry you cannot use AutoMapper for that specific thing. So I listen to as many channels as possible and direct them to the most useful place for that question. I do a lot with automation now. This is actually a lot of stuff the in-service bus particular team has done. So one of the things I have with my releases is if I tag in GitHub all of my issues with a specific tag, bug, improvement, or refactoring, there's this really cool tool out there called GitHub Release Notes that will automatically generate release notes for you for GitHub releases. And so I'll have these lovely release notes that are automatically being generated by me using that tool. You can plug this into all sorts of things to be able to get that sort of functionality. I would highly recommend for new projects looking at tools like AppVeyor that lets you easily host a build of an open source project and automatically publish out to NuGet, all sorts of cool stuff like that. It's just kind of like the actual publishing process of open source is much easier now than it used to be. The last two lessons I got here, nobody uses features you don't document. Surprise, surprise. And then the last lesson I have is if you focus on solving your own problems first, then if you help anyone else, that's just a bonus. But if you're able to do what you need for yourself, then that's about the best you could possibly do. If you have any questions about running open source projects, I'm certainly not the most perfect person in the world. I'm not the greatest in closing GitHub issues and whatever, but I at least like to share my experience. You can hit me up on Twitter. It's just @jbogard, my first initial and last name, or follow me on GitHub for, I don't know what that actually does, but you can do that. Or email me, it's just jimmy.bogard@gmail.com. Thank you very much. I'll be around to ask questions. Otherwise, have a great rest of the conference. I shouldn't clap at myself, that's weird. Question?
So, in your projects, presumably you take pull requests.
Yes.
This kind of thing. So, what do you do when someone submits a pull request that maybe doesn't quite get the patterns you're using in your code? How do you go about getting that pull request shaped the way you want it to be shaped?
Sometimes I'll ask them to make go a different way. Other times I'll take the pull request and just change the code the way I want it to be. That's what I usually do. If it's like totally off, then I'll say, actually, I would like to solve it this way and give them a chance to go do it that way instead. Or we have a conversation about it.
That's an interesting, to me, that's an interesting friction point in open source because on a team, you're working with guys or people you're working with every day, you just talk about it, right? Or you have documents internally that you can share and those kinds of things. But in this kind of scenario, it's random Joe or Sue or whoever off the street submitting this pull request and you don't really have that communications channel.
I've been pretty lucky in the pull requests I've gotten. There's nothing that's been like just out of left field. The couple I have had that, I've given it my best shot to like have them explain what they're doing. But ultimately, I'm not good about it. I let them languish, and I'm not a good person. James.
Yeah, so let's say you've gotten rid of a few packages or you removed some methods. And for me, for instance, I've had some methods obsolete for like a year.
Mm-hmm.
For you, when is it okay to delete a package or just remove those APIs?
So deleting a package is not a big deal. You can unlist them, but you can still get them from NuGet. So that's actually not a big deal for me. The other one, though, of APIs, actually the particular team has another cool tool that is able to check Symver to see if you have broken your public API space. So they can actually tell you that you have broken Symver, you need to bump your major version. And so their builds actually fail if they've changed the API and don't then change the version of their assembly. So that's the best one I have, is I keep things obsolete for all the minor releases, and then the next major release, they're removed.
Okay, so major release.
Major release removes. Sean, and I think I got to stop after that.
When do you decide to do your IPC project?
All my projects have been at least 6 months of internal use, if not longer. So it's a long time.
Ask why.
Because I want to prove out the idea to make sure it's actually a thing. Once I put it up on GitHub, then it becomes more difficult for me to make changes to that stuff and get that into my project. Now I have to make a NuGet package and consume a NuGet package. Now I have a harder time debugging. So if it's just inside my project, like even a different project or folder or whatever, then it's a much quicker feedback loop to refine the idea until I get something good, and then I can then make it a package. So just tightening the feedback initially.
So the IPC includes the NuGet package?
Yes. Yes. For my stuff. All right, thank you very much, everyone.